We live? Okay, now we're live.
We're-
Welcome to Chit Chat, y'all, where our interest is getting our chit together. Following the dictum, material well being follows spiritual well being. Chit means knowledge as enlightened awareness. If we can remove the limitations of our own awareness as individuals, then we do a great good to the collective.
Mhm. I love
So,
that, Jaya.
our tagline, of course, on our thing, which we may have to change, is spilling the spiritual tea. So, what tea we got today, Kishore Chandra?
Oh my God, the tea is scalding today. It's hot, it's juicy. I was like, when I suggested this as a topic, I was like, this is gonna take a long time to get into because I feel like it's one of those things, it's one of those topics that is so scandalous. Like if you're looking at it from the point of view of someone who's not involved in it, you're like, oh my God, how could it be, etc. But I also feel
Right.
like this is something that so many of us participate in a day-to-day basis in our lives.
Keep
And so
going. I gotta just grab my charger. I'm listening.
okay, go for it. Go grab your charger. I feel like it's one of those things on a day-to-day that so many of us do. Harry Volkavi, because it's one of those things where it's like the pot. How does that saying go? The pot calling the kettle black. That's it, right?
Yes,
I
that's
think so.
it.
Yeah, the pot calling the kettle black, because the topic that we have to do that we're going to dive into today, the tea that we're diving into today, is about something very human. I feel like, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I'm not going to give more preambles. So there's been a lot of stuff going on the internet about essentially people being over COVID. It's like hashtag over COVID. I'm over it. I don't want to wear my mask in public anymore. And I feel like this isn't something super new. Like it's not something super new, in the United States. Happy New Year, Preeti. In the United States, specifically, like in Middle America, there was a lot of like protests of just like, we don't want to wear our masks anymore. Like people going down to town halls and city halls and like protesting, we don't want to wear our masks anymore, etc. So that's nothing new.
Right.
However, the tea that is new is now it's not just hashtag over COVID or like no more masks or things like this, but there's a very unique hashtag that has come about, and the hashtag is hashtag gays over COVID. And basically it's like, there's all this video footage, photography of like gay people, specifically more gay men, that are just like out in Mexico and Puerto Vallarta, in Miami and Rio de Janeiro, and all these like cities that are seen as kind of like gay capitals of the world. And they're just like partying to the, umpteenth degree. Like they're just
Okay.
no masks, no shirts, all
They're
of it.
doing what's called a circuit party, right?
Yes, they're
Can
doing
you
what's called
explain? Can you explain what that is? Because to be real, I don't know what that is precisely. Because I'm innocent. I'm innocent. I joined the ashram when I was 18. I got around all
Wow.
from.
Wow. So basically you're saying that I'm the tainted one,
No,
right?
no, but you had a little bit more experience with the world before I did, so you kind of know a little bit more about these things.
Okay, so yeah, basically what they're doing is a circuit party, and we're gonna talk more than just the hashtag gays over COVID, because this phenomenon is being seen both in the LGBT world and also in the straight world. It's like happening in both ends. So we will start here, but
It's a
really,
human issue.
it's a human issue. It's definitely a human issue. So a circuit party is basically like a licentious kind of like no rules party, that it's just like you can really, it's kind of scary to think about. It's like thousands of people, hundreds of people. It can get up to the thousands, and it's just like these like 2-day, 3-day benders, just like insane parties where it's just like alcohol, drugs, all the like crazy stuff that you can possibly think of. It's happening. We don't need to get into the details, but it's
Right.
happening at these parties. And so basically, yeah, lots of these parties were happening for New Year's. And specifically, this story that I sent Jaya was just so, it was like, I remember someone writing about this, and when they saw this happen, they were like, wow, sometimes the jokes really just write themselves. Because essentially what had happened was that, there are all these people coming to Puerto Vallarta in Mexico to party, in these kind of circuit parties, and do it without do it kind of like in a hidden, very sneaky way. So the people who were organizing this party in Puerto Vallarta basically had to like change the location various times and go through various different kind of like shady social media accounts to like make it happen without being under the purview of the police. Because if the police would have known that this was happening in Puerto Vallarta in Mexico, they would have shut it down.
Right.
So they had to go like very sneaky measures to make this happen. And they were charging out the wazoo. They were charging $150 a pop to get on this like, you know, special party, boat party. And essentially, long story short, you know, all the people came, all, you know, people from Boston, people from New York, you know, all these gays came to Puerto Vallarta to get on this boat, to get on this party. They got on the boat. They're there to party, you know, no mask, no social distancing, just having a grand old time. And apparently, I shouldn't be laughing at this.
I posted an article in the chat box for anyone who wants to see like a fuller explanation.
Yeah, a fuller explanation of it. But apparently the boat started very slowly. No one got injured, no one died. The boat started very slowly capsizing and just like, and it was this very dramatic thing where like 10 other boats in the area had to go and like save them, and like, oh God.
It was funny because when you sent me the article and they had like gathered some social media accounts of people who took videos of the boat sinking, and one of them was like, this boat sinking hits harder when you put it to Titanic music. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, go for it, Jaya.
Well, I don't know if you want to finish the full. Are you finished with the story? Because I do have some interesting things I like.
Yeah, I think I'm finished with the story. I mean, that's one of the stories, because there's also the story about Dr. Mike, which I think we can get to later.
Yeah.
But I'll just end the story with saying that there was a lot of controversy around this, folks, because the controversy was basically like, wow, you know, other people, not just in the gay community, but in all the communities, they were seeing this. And there was a lot of controversy basically around the fact like, wow, you are putting your desire to have fun and to like be licentious and just like, you know, no hold bars, just like have a grand old time. So you're putting that desire over the fact that like we're in a global pandemic, you know, like we're in a global pandemic, and like whatever your opinions might be about it, like the fact that you're gathering in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And there have been cases, I'm not exaggerating, folks, like literally in Rio de Janeiro here in Brazil, there was like some giant gay party that the cops had to shut down that was thousands of people on the beach, no masks, no social, like crazy. So basically the global community is saying like, how could this be? Like, how could you be so irresponsible that you're putting not only yourself at risk, but you're putting like people in the local community at risk? When the boat capsized, they were saying like, you're putting all the people who had to go and save you, you know, from your own folly, you're putting them at risk. So I think that, you know, we'll get into this, I'm sure, later, because I think that there's two sides to this. One is, or two ways that we can approach this. One is like, okay, the material way, in the sense of like, yeah, you're putting people at risk and we're in a global pandemic and etc. But the way that I'm more interested about, and I'm sure we'll dive into this in a bit, is just a lot of what, you know, a spiritual perspective might say about this. And that's what we really are here on Chit Chat for, to look at what the spiritual perspective says about this. Because essentially this is a story about our senses and our desire to enjoy our senses and it not going according to plan.
You know, the first thing that occurred to me when I read the article was just the eternal dilemma of all humans between desire and virtue. This sort of dilemma is indicated by Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 36. It's a pretty famous verse. I mean, I always say that this was the only question of Arjuna I could understand when I first read the Bhagavad Gita, because everything else I was like, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what Krishna is saying. I don't know what Arjuna is asking. But this particular verse was like very relatable, even as an 18-year-old with zero understanding of Vedic culture or spiritual. And this verse, I'll just say it here. Atakena prayukto yam papam tarati purusha anichanapi varshneya bhaladiva niyojita. So Arjuna is saying here, by what force is a person impelled to, he uses the word papam, which is generally translated as sin. I like to sometimes translate it as counter flourishing, activity. Because basically the result of sin is that you go down. So it's like counter flourishing. It's not something that leads to human flourishing in any sense of the word. So by what force is someone engaged to counter flourishing activity? And then he uses where anichanappi, even though they don't have the desire to do that. And what he means by anichanappi, not having the desire, is that he has a certain conception of the world that particular desire is conflicting with. So, in other words, like in the scenario that you're giving, you know, I should be social distancing. I should be wearing masks. These people on the boat, they obviously had to some degree a worldview that told them that they should be doing that. And yeah, Anichan, and therefore there may be like, I don't want to participate in this because that will be a problem for me needing to honor this thing, honor my virtue. Or the other way I like to articulate is just that you have some sort of moral, what's the word I'm looking for? Like moral landscape that particular desire is in conflict with. So you don't desire to do it because it contradicts your moral integrity in some way. Anichanappi. And of course, for the Gita, it means it's anti-shastra, because Krishna says in the Gita that whatever you do, tasmat shastram pramanam te karya karya vyavasito, that allow the scripture to be the evidence for what should be done and what should not be done. So basically, anichanappi means I don't desire to do it because Shastra says it's bad. Still, even though I don't desire to do it, I do it anyway as if engaged by force. This is the last statement of Arjuna's question. And this is such a relevant verse because there's this desire, and then there's like my moral principles, and they're in conflict. And when we say desire here, because you can have desires that are aligned with truth also. But as we know, as conditioned humans, so expert at folly, our desires tend to lean toward, caprice and destruction. And so there's this like desire, and then there's like my moral principles, and they're in conflict with one another. And somehow the desire part gets the edge, and you just cross the boundaries of your virtue, or you cross the boundaries of what is virtuous, and you enter into this sort of capricious and destructive zone by the force of desire. So this is like a very human problem. So I know like hearing this particular scenario, because it's kind of, I mean, it's funny. Let's be real. It's hilarious. They're like on a boat, and it's like capsizes, like without them noticing at first, and that one video with the Titanic music in the background was just like, it was awesome. It was just like completely hilarious. But so the tendency will be to like jump on these guys and shame them for that. And that may be well justified also. It may be warranted to whatever degree. But at least before we get to like judging them for that, let's just consider the human condition in which this takes place. Also in our own lives, where there's a tension between desire and our moral boundaries. And like, I'm not going to give any personal examples right now because I'm not in that space to be vulnerable, because I'm already feeling depressed and I don't need any extra help in that area. I got up way too early today, and that didn't really help my depression. So. But I'm not going to give any personal examples of vulnerability here. But what I want to say is that I think by a little bit of introspection, we've all been in a situation where there was this tension between the Sanskrit word in Gita is kama, our capricious and destructive desires. That's what we mean by kama here. And our moral principles and the boundaries that's supposed to be governing our life, the boundaries of virtue that's supposed to be governing our life and allowing us to flourish. Those have come into tension. I'm sure more than one time we've crossed beyond those boundaries and entered into a destructive zone because of the strength of desire. So Arjuna himself is posing this question. So, and he's like a very, very pious person. And if he can account for this experience within his own psyche, either personally or even vicariously, then it speaks to this being like an eternal issue of the human condition. So that someone would do this is not like astonishing. Like, so for me, it's like when I like hear people like wanting to chastise or shame this particular incident as something astonishing, I'm like, what's astonishing about that? Like, if after all, especially nowadays, morality seems to be something to the degree like whatever you can, whatever you know, there's a degree of your morality by what you do when no one's looking.
Mm.
And quite frankly speaking, if you can get away with something with the sort of moral landscape of the age of the postmodern era, people do stuff like this, and it's
Mm.
very natural. So instead of the conversation being around, I guess the limitation of the secular conversation around these things to me is that it always goes into like what the people actually did and maybe chastising or shaming them for that. Whereas the conversation can expand a little bit to like, okay, what is it about the human condition that karma often wins the day over a person's virtues or desire to be virtuous? What is
Mm.
it about that? And then how do we deal with this problem of karma? That seems
Mm.
like a more important question than just obviously on a practical level, some arrests may have been made or whatever. That's on a practical level. But if you're talking about like on a rehabilitation level or in a way that you really want to uplift the situation, then this becomes like a more important question. Like, how does one tackle this karma? And again, by karma, we mean capricious and destructive desires, which tend to push us into the passive boundaries of our virtue, into the wilderness of folly. So how do we deal with that particular issue? And then that's where the secular world doesn't seem to offer any insight whatsoever. It doesn't even seem to occur to them that that's the issue. Like there are more metaphysical issues at play here than just what actually took place. And that's kind of the limitation of the secular conversation. Anyway, yeah.
No, thank you so much, Jaya, for speaking like this, because I really love. Well, before I go on my thing, I want to see what Preeti's saying, because she's always dropping the chit. She's always dropping the mic.
Right.
So Preeti says people are fed up, no doubt, but others have suffered far more in history than having to wear a mask. We just don't exercise our austerity muscle as humans very much. I really love that. I really love that, Preeti, so much. Oh yeah, thank you for putting that up, Jaya. I love that, Preeti, so much, because I think that, you know, I was listening to a Instagram live earlier today, and it was with our dear friend Doyle Garunga and Danya.
Oh, I missed
and
that. Okay.
It was very nice. I only watched like the first half because I had to go after. But Danya is she's like a practicing clinical psychologist or a psychotherapist, and Doyle is like studying to be a social worker like this. And I found this super interesting because basically what Danya was saying, which I really appreciated, was that essentially like we are very much in any classical kind of psychological therapeutic setting, we're essentially taught how to become functioning cogs in the machine of like material life.
Yes.
And like, and that's what it came down to. Like there's like that. And what I think that this connects to what you were just speaking, Jaya, because you were saying like in the secular conversation, it kind of just stops at a certain point, and we're not able to get to those deeper metaphysical issues where it's like, you know, we're talking about a boat slowly capsizing in Puerto Vallarta. You know, a bunch of gay people, 500 gay people got to a party in Puerto Vallarta, and this happened. But actually, there's a very human issue here, and not only a human issue, but a very metaphysical issue here. And it's like, well, why can't we get to that place, not only in a normal conversation, a normal secular conversation, you know, but even so, like on a conversation in terms of like psychology and self-help and all this kind of stuff. And I think that this is where spirituality is such an important thing, because it's like exactly what Preeti just said. It's like we're not able to exercise our austerity muscles as humans very much. And why? Well, it's because like we don't live in a spiritual society. We live in a secular society that's not asking us to exercise our austerity muscle. And rather, they're benefiting from us not exercising our austerity muscle. They're benefiting from us not being able to detach ourselves from our phone. You know, we spoke about this last week. Last week, we touched upon this issue of the Instagram privacy situation and their camera and, you know, all of this stuff. So they're very much, you know, corporations and this kind of stuff are very much benefiting off of that, off of our inability to exercise austerity and ask deeper questions, ask deeper metaphysical questions. And I feel like that's why whenever you tell someone, like, you know, I think that anyone who's ever practiced any sort of spirituality has this schism in their identity when they start to get really deep into it. And the schism is more than just like, it's a very deep schism. It's a very deep schism because I feel like, you know, it's not just my friends. Oh, my friends think I'm weird because I've joined, you know, this spiritual whatever. I'm becoming a yoga person. My friends think I'm weird. It's a really base identity schism between yourself and society. Because society, this is what Tanya was saying, society benefits off of you being able to function properly as a cog in this, like, you know, commodified machine.
Right.
And therefore, that's why we see these kinds of stories continuously come up again and again and again. It's not just the hashtag gays over COVID, you know, this Dr. Mike example, I think it's a nice time to bring up Dr. Mike. Apparently, folks, Dr. Mike is one of the most famous Instagram social media doctors out there. He has like 4 million followers on Instagram.
Over 6 million on YouTube.
Over 6 million on YouTube. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. So homeboy, last post on Instagram is like, I got my vaccine, with his big muscles. I got my vaccine. Like, wear your mask, everyone. Social distance. Do what you're supposed to do. Da 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 da. Breaking news: New York Post gets caught red-handed on a boat. Boats are very popular, apparently. On a boat in Miami with all these like half-naked girls, you know, partying it up. No mask, no social distancing, all of this stuff. And I think what's really important here is like, okay, fine, he succumbed. And all the gays and Dr. Mike, they succumbed to their base desires. You know, this beautiful verse that you're bringing up in Bhagavad Gita about Arjuna himself asking, like, even though I don't have this intention to do it, but still I fall, still I succumb to this, right? So, okay, they're succumbing to the desires. However, I think the aftermath is what's very important, you know, because it's like, then it's like shaming comes of like, you're not supposed to do these things and you're a hypocrite. And now it turns into a scandal, you know, with the gays over COVID story. It turned into all these people coming and saying, well, this is call out culture or cancel culture and etc. And then you have the other side saying, no, you know, they should be protecting society and they should like this. And the same thing with Dr. Mike and his story, right? People being like, oh, you know, he's a hypocrite and how dare he and etc. And other people being like, no, this is shaming and etc. and all of this stuff. So I think it's such an interesting phenomenon, actually, and it's a metaphysical phenomenon for sure. It might look very materialistic and external when you look at it from out here, but you know, I feel like Priti brought up this very wonderful point about austerity. I'll end here, about austerity and our inability to do so because we're not trained to do so, and also this aspect of shame and being shamed about our desires and not knowing how to really work with them in a sustainable way. So we go to that destructive place.
Right. There was a lot there. I think the first thing I just want to amplify from what you were saying is in connection to what I was also saying is I want to amplify the need to inquire deeper. And like, don't let the story or the perception of what's going on stop only at the grossest level, like at the level what you can actually see. But you have to inquire deeper into the things that you can't see. I mean, that's what is the intention of metaphysical. It's like not gross. And even though when we're talking about karma, as far as Vedanta is concerned, that's still within the, you know, the physical world, so to speak. But it's like subtle physical. It's instead of it being like gross, it's cognitive. It's a cognitive issue. It manifests in the subtle body and so on. And our ability to like inquire deeper beyond just what we see with our eyes is really important for coming to deeper solutions to these issues. And I don't want to indicate, well, I do want to indicate, I would suggest that the industrial, you know, complex that we are kind of under now, obviously banks, by keeping people's ability to inquire deeper, arrested. Sidebar, this is reminding me of George Orwell's book, 1984. And one of the things that I found, they were all like, one of the very big themes in that book is controlling thought. So there was like the thought police, and where certain actions indicated certain thoughts, so they were there to shut it down. And we see a lot of that playing out today. One of the things that I found really interesting about that book is the language of the book the language of the dystopia was called Newspeak. And the whole idea of Newspeak was to remove words from the language, because usually language has this ability to like acquire words. But the whole idea of Newspeak was to remove words from the language, because if you didn't have a word, then the idea was that you wouldn't really have the concept. And then if you didn't have the concept, you couldn't think about it. And in that way, it was another way of just like controlling thought. And so I do feel in a lot of ways that the way the industrial complex works is to keep our ability to inquire deeper, like arrested. You know, with the Netflix, I mean, let's be real, with the Netflix, even with the way the academy is going, Hollywood music. I mean, what the hell is mumble rap anyway? Not making a full critique on that, but it's like the language, and even like I noticed it's like even with like texting people, we have like all this shorthand now. And one of the things that I noticed in text messaging, sorry, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but like you are is often spelled Y-O-U-R. And at a certain point, it's just like, okay, obviously we're just missing that. But it started to occur to me, like, as I was doing that more and more and more often, that I started to become concerned. Like, I'm not moving slow enough to just articulate myself in writing properly. And then it kind of just becomes like a part of you in a sort of imperceptible sort of way. And before you know it, you just, dumb as rocks. So all that is that I guess I'm amplifying that idea that there's something about the way the modern world functions where it arrests its deeper inquiry. Like when we get together with our friends, we're only asking about what happened on last season of whatever it is that we're watching together as a group, or we're only asking about, what happened in, I don't even know how to say Puerto
Vallarta.
Thank you. We're only asking about like the grossest parts of things, and we're not inquiring into a deeper layer that's leading to a lot of the exigencies that we're seeing on the external platform. And so that obviously becomes dangerous. I think also I like to add, to amplify this same point, is to say like all spiritual literatures that you encounter in at least the Eastern world, at least the Vedanta literatures, they all are like basically dialectics between an adept and an inquirer. And you can basically understand the basic trajectory of the literature by looking at the question in the beginning of the book. And like, what is the focus and interest of the book, just by looking at the questions. And so much so, like in the Bhagavad Purana, which is the main literature for our Bhakti tradition, the book opens up with 6 questions, basically about the absolute reality. And then when the answer is about to come, the first thing that's stated before the answer comes is that your questions themselves give bliss. Because one of the questions, like, we want to give the answer that will give us bliss. And so the adept, Sutta Goswami, he says, your questions themselves give bliss. Atma suprasidati, the satisfaction of the self. Your questions themselves give bliss, what to speak of actual answers to these questions. So I'm going to, plug myself again. I came up with this, little maxim that I like very much, that evolution of inquiry precedes evolution of being. And that's like really important, and it can't be downplayed. That's one point. The other point you brought up, which is really fascinating for me, is the schism created in spiritual practitioners because of, well, you didn't exactly articulate it this way, but this is how I heard it. The schism that comes in spiritual practitioners because of knowledge. I mean, aside from the fact that the industrial complex doesn't want us thinking deeper, and they're largely successful because we're grown in their world, more or less. Even on a more metaphysical level than even the industrial demons is ignorance itself, or avidya, or sometimes we just call it as Maya Shakti, the deluding potency of the material world, or acting in the material world. The schism, I find, is created by knowledge. So like when you're in ignorance, as the saying goes, ignorance is bliss, right? So when you're in ignorance, there's like really no issue. It's when the knowledge comes that the issues start really coming up. And I've told this story before, I'm sure, on Chit Chat, but I'm telling it again because I think it's funny. I was distributing a book when I was in the monastery. I was distributing Bhagavad Gitas, and I stopped this one kid who was like a Catholic. He like said, "No, thank you, I'm Catholic." And he just walked off, didn't take the book, didn't really stop. And then I don't want to say shout, because shouting is not my style. I got clapped. But I did say aloud because he was walking away quite fast that I said the reason you don't want to read this book is because it will place a burden of knowledge on you by which you would have to act in a different way. And he said, I know.
Mm.
And I was kind of blown away. First of all, I was like, wait, how do you know Bhagavad Gita? Maybe he read Thomas Merton, who was a fan of Bhagavad Gita or something. I don't know. But all he said was, I know. And he continued to walk off. And it was like, I was like, first of all, I want to appreciate your honesty. Second of all, I was just like really taken it back. Like, yeah, he was like, I don't want the burden of knowledge because knowledge is also a burden. At least in the beginning, it's experienced as such in the beginning. Like Christian says in the Bhagavad Gita when he's talking about happiness and the mode of goodness, and that it comes from practice and it's experienced as bitter in the beginning or poison in the beginning. It's bliss in the end. And in the end means when you've achieved Atma, I think he used the word Atma Buddhi Prasadajam, which basically means satisfaction of the self. So knowledge creates the schism when you're in the beginning stages. Because what is a schism? Like basically, you know what you're supposed to be doing so that you can flourish. And then there's your habits, you know, the habits of thinking, basically the habits of inferiority to our actual potential they have inertia in them. Like it's very hard to just turn the car around all of a sudden. And so that schism puts, you know, a thinking person who's cultivating knowledge or getting knowledge somehow or other, it puts them in quite a dilemma. One that I certainly can relate to for sure, because especially like in Christian conscious world, the knowledge is pretty high, immaculate. The standard of responsibility that comes from that knowledge is like scary. And sometimes you know, in the beginning, I was like, wow, this is a beacon of light. And sometimes I'm like, this is like a big ass boulder. Excuse me. My bad. It's like a big old boulder that I'm hardly able to like hold up, you know. And it can be like crushing sometimes when you're not able to meet the standard. You feel kind of like dejected about it and so on. So there, aside from the schism, yeah. So I wanted to say that, amplify the idea that knowledge really does create a schism. Now, in this particular scenario that we're drawing this discussion from, I don't think these people were particularly in knowledge. But what I do find interesting about it is that like in the story, the gays, because there was this Instagram group called Gays Over COVID, who like tricked off on this party. Because I guess first of all, the guy who organized the party, his name was like Jeffrey Sanker, which I thought was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting name considering what happened with your vote. Okay, anyway. So Jeffrey Sanker, I'm like, reality is stranger than fiction sometimes. So Jeffrey Sanker, he was like really trying to get around the police. So he was like, don't tell anyone, you know, the information and all that. And this Gays Against COVID Instagram page tricked off on him. And that's how they found out. So in that article, he's like playing victim. So the victim part is that this is dividing our community.
Yes.
And what I found really interesting about that particular statement, this is dividing our community, is that, well, two things. The first thing I want to say is that it kind of reduces a person to just that one metric of understanding. Like if a person is gay, for example, instead of seeing like as a whole person with like a personality and, you know, variegated views over variegated issues, you're just gay. And if you're gay, that means you must think in a certain way, you must act in a certain way, you must be in a certain way. I mean, that whole statement, like this is dividing the community, is kind of reducing all gays to this one metric. I'm like, well, what about there are gays who are conservative? There are gays who are liberal. They're like, why are you trying to reduce them to this one metric? So that's just another general issue. I don't know if we have so much time to unpack that, but it's an interesting thing how we reduce one another to these like easily measurable metrics and then try to judge a whole person, which is like a really complex being, on these easily caught sort of metrics of measurement. The other thing I thought he would have had a case for, now this is me flipping the script, and sorry, my conspiratorial side is about to come out. Me flipping the script a little bit, I would have been more sympathetic or maybe even empathetic to their plight if their circuit party, which I think is abominable, by the way, just on principle, but that's because I'm a Hare Christian, so we think like that. I would have been more empathetic to their plight if their circuit party was a protest to the government lockdown. Now, I don't, y'all know I have my doubts about what's going on with this whole COVID thing. You know, we get the vaccine and then all of a sudden we're hearing about a second strain. It's more dangerous than first. And I do tend to think that it's a lot of fear mongering, but that's besides the point right now. We can get into those things later. If these were like gays who were like really fed up because they really believe that this isn't true, because there's a lot of people out there in the world who are protesting the veracity of what's actually going on. And for me, I can empathize with those groups because whatever their framework is, their actions are congruent with their inner thinking about the thing. So if these gays were they were doing their circuit party as a form of protest to the actual voraciousness of what's happening, like they don't believe it, they don't take it to be true. I could really empathize with that because then there's a congruency between what you're doing and what you're thinking. But if you're thinking that COVID and all this is like a real thing and it's like a real problem for the world, and you're doing a circuit party, the F is that. And that's where we get into like Dr. Mike's case. He has been making bank. The way I found out about him is I found out about this story because I was watching a fitness channel because I'm trying to get my fitness together. And the fitness channel I was watching covered this particular story. He has put out tons of videos since COVID started. Tons of videos. Making bank. All his videos have like over 1 million views. So he's been banking on the message of wear a mask, social distance is absolutely necessary, debunking Trump. Like he's been making all this money off of that. And then he gets caught in this party. First of all, his lawyer tried to say that he only took his mask off to go into the water. I was like, the picture was him on a boat surrounded by girls in bikinis. So that kind of doesn't hold up too tight. And I think the limitation for people you can have around you is like 10. In that picture, it's like 25 people in that picture. Most of them looking like, we're gonna leave it at that because I'm not trying to get caught by the ladies. But most of them looking like they about something freaky. So he wasn't. So the reason I think calling him out is appropriate, aside from the fact that there is the human condition of pushing us toward outside the boundaries of our virtue, is because there's an incongruency with what he's proclaiming to believe in and what he's actually doing. And that's fair in the same way that calling out the gays, because there's an incongruency of belief and actions, calling out Dr. Mike for the same reason, I think is absolutely fair. Like if I was like on a boat around a bunch of scantily clad ladies, they were beautiful. So I'm not gonna like, they were beautiful ladies. If I was, and that was literally me because I don't believe in the truth of what's actually happening, then all power to you. But if you're actually going around making this message, making bank off of it, and people are like looking to you as a beacon of example, and then you don't do it, then what's up with that? You should definitely be called out for that. Sorry, I know I spoke a lot. I had a lot of ideas that yours thing brought up from
No. I love hearing you speak and go for it. I also spoke a lot, and I know that my ideas were all over the place. Because the thing is that it's like such a seemingly, mundane and banal thing. Is really like, it's really deep actually, And I think that the more that we get used to as a secularized society, unfortunately, the more that we get used to, not used to, what's the word, desensitized to like the scandals, and now there's this in the news, and now there's this in the news. We don't really go beyond just seeing the externals, and we don't ask those deeper questions of like, well, why are the gays getting on the boat in the first place? And like, why does Dr. Mike feel so pressured to be a perfect image of a doctor? Is it to make money, or does he have something deeper going on? And why did he go on that boat in the first place? There's so many things to be asked. I just wanted to take, I have a lot to say about what you just said, because there was a lot of points there, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of them and amplify some of them. But I just thought it was interesting what Kavya is saying here. So she says that there was a huge protest of people in a community during Victorian lockdown in Australia. Hundreds of people showed up and they still wore masks because it's illegal not to. They painted the organizer all over the news as a cult leader and showed him getting arrested so to deter others. I think this is very interesting because, you know, speaking about, you know, the congruency point that you were making of just like, okay, well, what do you believe, and are you actually like doing what you say you're going to believe? It feels like this is a little bit more like just out in the open, you know, like this is what I believe. I'm showing up to this protest. Fine, you know, it's illegal to not wear a mask, so I'm going to wear a mask, and it is what it is. And you know, I don't know the details of this case. I'm not sure if he's actually a cult leader. It doesn't seem like he is because Kavi used quotation marks to say that he's a cult leader. But I still think I think that's very interesting. The fact that like they showed up to just be like, hey, we're protesting this because enough is enough, and still it seems like the news or the media decided to paint him in this way as to deter others from doing so. And I think it's just, you know, I think that's one conversation to go into. Oh yeah, Kavi said no, he isn't at all. Yeah, he's not a cult leader, folks. So he's not a cult leader.
Oops.
Oh, we keep on.
We're both trying to put the quote up and then. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so Kavi says no, he isn't at all. And I think that's really interesting, right? Because like the media has a way of spinning things and manipulating things to essentially make a certain point come across or a certain reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go for it.
Just on that very thing, like even in the article that you sent me, and both articles have been posted in the community comments thread. Even in that, the article framed the nurses, because there were apparently nurses and doctors who went to that circuit party also.
Yes, there were.
Yes,
there were.
What I found interesting in the article is that those doctors and nurses, they use the word egregious as the modifier of these particular doctors and nurses. So obviously what I find very interesting about so-called news today, which is literally witch casting to me. Sorry, sidebar, a meme, but there was this meme on the top of the meme is witches doing spells and it said casting. And then on the bottom of the meme is all the news station. It says broadcasting. So I really do think it's something like that going on, to be frank. But why I think that is that instead of just presenting like news as it is, they like throw in these little modifiers here and there and there. So they're like pigeonholing you to think a certain way about these people and about the decisions that they made, instead of just like presenting the facts and then allowing you to come to your own conclusions about them. So I just want to jump in on that because I did notice that in the article that even the doctors and nurses who are also going to the party, they got framed as egregious. And I was like, well, why are they egregious? They're just, you know, they want to enjoy it. I mean, I get that, but why are they egregious now? If they're doctors, maybe they know anyway. So
yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up, because I think the way that people get labeled due to their actions creates the vicious cycle, or further strengthens the vicious cycle.
Absolutely.
And a point that I wanted to jump on that you made about how, you know, in the gays over COVID situation, Puerto Vallarta boat capsizing thing, and also for Dr. Mike, where it's like when I become so, what's the word I'm looking for, like involved with a certain aspect of my identity, that it becomes so concretized. It becomes, it literally usurps my spirit and my soul, you know? That version of myself, or that specific aspect of myself, whether it's a public, you know, social media doctor, or whether it's a sexual orientation, or whether it's an aspect of race, or any of these things, when that becomes so like concrete, it really becomes detrimental. I feel like it really becomes scary, actually, because we start to ask the question, you know, about the gays over COVID situation. I'll speak about this. I was seeing some of my friends posting things about this, you know, like getting very angry about this. Friends that I have in the gay community, they're just like, you know, calling them out and being like, this is bad for our community, and this, etc. And one point that they did bring up, which I will bring up because I think it's an important point, is asking the question, which we've already said, well, why were they on the boat in the first place? You know, like what led them from being a nurse in a hospital in the United States, telling other people to wear masks,
Aside
getting
from
back.
high libido, okay, just
Yeah.
getting that out of the way.
Aside from high libido, what led them to like put all of their moral values and moral compasses and moral landscapes, just like putting that aside, and I'm gonna just get on the boat and do what's happening on the boat, because there's all these things that we're not gonna say here on Chit Chat because it's a little too much, but there's a lot of stuff happening on that boat, folks, and it's very. I like the word that you use, Jaya. It's very destructive. It's very destructive. And something that you brought up that I wanted to jump on before, it was like 2 times ago before you talked, is this idea of rehabilitation. And what does that actually mean? Because I think that I'm going to try to get this out in a very like cogent way so that I'm not going all over the place. I feel like so many of us, can Kavi join next time? Yes, we should have Kavi on. Kavi's amazing.
Oh my God, absolutely. Wait, we're on a new platform, so we can have guests on. So
yes, we can. We should discuss this.
Yeah,
we should discuss this. But I think what I'm trying to say is that being in this material body is very akin to being sick, like an illness. It's a material body that we know is not going to last. It's a material body that we know is imperfect, that we know gets us in trouble. Our mind, our senses get us in trouble. Our physical body itself gets sick, it gets us in trouble, it gets diseased, et cetera, et cetera. Yet there seems to be this unwillingness, perhaps because there's not the knowledge there in a secular society, but an unwillingness to move towards a spiritual reality or a spiritual, knowledge. And because that happens, it keeps us in so much, basically this cycle, this vicious cycle of destructive behavior, of fear, fear of not being able to like get the things that are going to make me feel good, or get the things that are going to fulfill my senses or fulfill my desires. And that's essentially it, folks. Like if you really look at like material world, secular life, it's like I have mine, and those around me, my family, and you're over there, and I'm going to help mine, and you're over there. And I was mentioning this in a Gita class that I was giving the other day to students. Anyone who's been in a big city, and you see the reality of, you really see it, you really see it. It happened to me today, and the person I was with was like having all these feelings about it. But the reality of like the haves versus the have-nots, the people out buying things and enjoying life and getting their cafe lattes and they're buying their things, and then people in the street who like literally have nothing, And I don't want to take it to too high of a thing, but just one personal thing that has happened to me, and I've been having to come to terms with this and like trying to see my own ideas around this, is that I'm in Brazil because my significant other is from Brazil, so we came here to get his things and whatever. And so apparently American money is worth a lot more here. And it's kind of like hard for me to understand this. So like we go to some place, and I'm like, we're just sitting, we're having dinner or whatever it is at some restaurant. And my significant other will be like, so we just spent what the normal person earns in like a month in this dinner. And I'm like, thank you for letting me know that. Now I will have to deal with that on my own, But I feel like those are the realities of life that we distract ourselves from, because we are caught in this materialistic understanding of the body. And really, I feel like specifically to the gay community, like what is driving us to that, self-destructive place? And it's not just the gay community, straight community, everyone. What is driving us towards that self-destructive behavior, whether it be partying or drinking or indulging in drugs or indulging in, sex that isn't good for us, all of this kind of stuff that's out there. It's like we're throwing ourselves into this stuff in a very like haphazard way. And I think that the Gays Over COVID story is just such a perfect example, because it's like you see the whole scenario play itself out. It's like you wanted to enjoy your senses without any sort of restraints or restriction, and the boat is slowly going down. It's like the sunset is slow. The curtains of the, dramatic tragedy are just like slowly closing. Da, 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 da. And it's just like, God, and the thing is, I'll end with this, because I was thinking of a verse in Bhagavatam. Specifically about this. I think what it really comes down to is fear. And I feel like we have so much to unpack around this, and we don't have time to unpack around this, because a lot of it is fear of not being able to enjoy, fear of not being able to like have a lasting experience in this world. So I thrust myself into experiences that are seemingly going to make me feel like, this is so good. This is such a, I'm sucking out all the juice of life that I possibly can, right? Like, Prahlad, like chewing on that which has already been chewed, like it's like at first it seems like really tasty food and really tasty bubblegum, and you're just like, this material world tastes yummy. But after a while, you're just like, this doesn't taste good anymore. And the verse that I wanted to bring up in the Bhagavatam is this verse. I was reading it today. It's 11th canto, 11th canto, chapter 2, verse 37. And it says, fear arises when a living entity misidentifies himself as the material body because of absorption in the external illusory energy of the Lord. When the living entity thus turns away from the Supreme Lord, he also forgets his own constitutional position as a servant of the Lord. This bewildering, fearful condition is affected by the potency for illusion called Maya, and therefore an intelligent person should engage unflinchingly in the unalloyed devotional service of the Lord under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, whom he should accept as his worshipful deity and as his very life and soul. And the reason I wanted to bring up this verse is because, go for it, Jai.
This is a seminal Gaudiya Vaishnava verse, and we're running out of time. This is, first of all, a perfect verse. It's a seminal verse that is quoted by acharyas or spiritual preceptors in our community. So the most important word in the phrase, you could say, in terms of the root of the problem, is isharapetasya. So isharapeta means to be turned away from God or to be alienated from God. And the result of this alienation is not an ontological one, because that's impossible, because God is an infinite truth. So nothing can be outside of God. So the alienation is a psychological one. So that is the meaning of isharapeta there. And then the result of that spiritual sort of alienation from God is asmriti, which means you lose remembrance or memory. And specifically, Acharya said the word asmriti there means you lose vision of your own soul. Like you lose this inherent self-awareness of yourself as a spiritual entity. And because of the loss of the self-understanding, viparya means you identify with that which is non-self. And once you've identified with that which is non-self, Dvitiya abhiniveshita means you become absorbed in the non-essential. Dvitiya means a second thing. So something that's not spiritual. You think that there's something outside of God, in other words, like this whole material world is my field of enjoyment. And from that absorption in the non-essential, bhayam, you become afraid. So I just wanted to read this quote. So at the root of this whole problem is the isharapeta, this sort of psychological alienation from God. And I just wanted to read this verse from Thomas Merton, and then I'm gonna let you get the final words, but I just had to share it because this is the perfect verse. It set me up too good. I didn't want to lose my chance. So this is let me share it here in the thing, and then I can read. Oh, okay, it was a little big. It was a little big. So this is, let me hide it. So this is Thomas Merton writing about Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. So he read Prabhupada's Gita, and he's giving like a little commentary. I refer to this phrase so much because it means a lot to me over the years. And he writes here, Swami Bhaktivedanta brings to the West a solitary reminder that our highly activistic and one-sided culture is faced with the crises that may end in self-destruction. Gaze for COVID. Okay, because it lacks the inner depth of an authentic metaphysical consciousness. Without such depth, our moral and political protestations are just so much verbiage. Yes. If in the West, God can no longer be experienced as other than dead, it is because of an inner split and self-alienation that have characterized the Western mind. And I'm just going to read the rest of it. You can hide that, and y'all just have to hear. An inner split and self-alienation that have characterized the Western mind and its single-minded dedication to only half of life, that which is exterior, objective, and quantitative. The death of God and the consequent death of a genuine moral sense, respect for life, for humanity, for value, has expressed the death of an inner subjective quality of life. The death of an inner subjective quality of life. that in the traditional religions where it's experienced in terms of God consciousness, not concentration on the idea or concept of God, still less an image of God, but a sense of presence of an ultimate ground of reality and meaning from which life and love could spontaneously flower.
Mhm.
Just really love that statement from
I love whenever you bring up this statement because it's such a good statement. And this thing that he mentions, how without our depth of metaphysical consciousness, that all our moral and political protestations are just so much verbiage. And I really feel like that linked to what Preeti was saying above, which I loved. I didn't miss that, Preeti. She says, I feel like our lives have been reduced to a marketing campaign. If it rhymes, it should be a movement. I really, I really love that, Pritzi, because it's like that's the verbiage that Thomas Merton is talking about, and it feels like we're just kind of like these pawns, lost, being turned away from God, lost, in ourselves, and being pawned and played in this game of basically self-destruction.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the gaze over COVID is such a hilarious but also like sad and tragic thing, because it's like we see that boat capsizing in so many of our endeavors to enjoy ourselves and our own endeavors to, like, I just want something to last and I just want this, and why can't I be the controller? Why can't I be God? Why can't I be Krishna? And it's like that happens all the time, and I feel like that's why these stories shed so much light on this. And I thought that this was a perfect verse to it's a perfect verse to bring up and also to end on, because it's like, this is the spiritual message, folks. And this is what we always say at the beginning of Chit Chat, right? It's about getting our chit together so that therefore we can then be, our chit being spiritual knowledge, so that therefore we can actually, give to the greater good and contribute to society accordingly. Because if we aren't getting our chit together, and not only our chit, like our basic relationship, our basic sambandha, our basic relationship with Krishna and understanding of like, well, what is this and who am I and what's material nature and what's God and what's spiritual nature? If I don't even understand this, like what's to say of me getting involved in movements and this and protests? It's all just fanfare, it's all just fanfare and frenzy and this back and forth and all of this stuff. And I feel like I remember the
careful
first,
now. Be careful now.
I remember the first. Well, I'll say it this way. I remember the first Chit Chat that we restarted this. We were looking into the news because we decided that our new kind of concept of Chit Chat was just like, let's pick a story or two and use it as kind of a springboard to go off. And I was texting Jay Jagannath. I was just like, I was researching and really going deep into this hole of news. And I was like, this is a dark hole of like death and destruction. Like I felt myself spinning and I literally couldn't take myself off the computer. I was like, and this story, and this story. Oh, and did you hear about this scandal, and this scandal, and this scandal? And it's very much designed in this, and that's what I meant by the fanfare. It's very much designed in this way to usurp our ability to get in touch and to have a awakening, a spiritual awakening. It usurps our ability to do that, to become engrossed in this like social media, story, scandal, like this. And to bring up Preeti's point again, which I really love, it usurps our ability to practice austerity and to practice sacrifice and to practice sadhana and to practice a real dedication, a real devotion. And I, not to call myself out, but I see that in myself so much, and I'm sure,
Absolutely.
It's a rhetorical question, but like I see that in myself, chanting my japa, and I'm like, whoop, like this, and the consciousness, the mind just gets so distracted so easily. And so, just to close off, I think our message is to really, get our chit together. As always, that's what Chit Chat is for, to get our personal chit together, our personal understanding of what is the soul and how can I turn to Krishna more? How can I not have my back turned against Krishna? Because that's what the root of the problem is, I don't know if you want to add some final words, Jaya.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground today. Again, very nice, fun chit chat. We have to leave. We have to stop exactly now because Kishore Chun's got somewhere to go. Another really fun conversation. I think one thing that we brought out in the beginning was asking deeper questions. The incident with this boat situation is indicating a deeper problem with the human psyche of the tension between our capricious and destructive desires and our desire for virtue, and how we can start winning more battles and for the side of virtue instead of resigning or getting popped off, popped and dropped by our desires. So asking deeper questions for that, and just having a sort of congruency. Again, no judgment here. There is a schism that's created by knowledge. So I think spiritual people, in a lot of ways, more than materialistic people, struggle with this congruency between like their inner world and what happens on the outside, because what the knowledge kind of obliges you to hold yourself to a higher standard than normal people. And so I'm honest with you, to be honest, I'm surprised I'm not schizo yet. I'm working really hard. Like, so that was a really important point that we also brought up, and more. We have to take notes on this, and
we have to take notes, and yeah, we'll close here. Thank you all so much for joining. It's so nice that you're all here and that this community has continued to be here for our chit chats going forward. Thank you so much for all the comments. Priti, David Madhava Prabhu, thank you for being here. And Kavi, definitely we should have some guests. We should discuss that in the future. And Melissa, it's so nice to have you all. And Priti, just your mic drops are always very welcome, and I love it so much. And thank you all so much for listening. We'll be here next week, Monday at 5 p.m., and we'll see what the news has in store for us then. Thank you, Madhu Puri, Hari Hari Bol. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jai Jagannath. And Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Kishore.